Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly suggested. The following is for educational and amusement reasons only, and is the verbatim federal. According to Inner City Press, Cuba Gooding Jr. took the stand in the Sean Diddy Combs trial. With a heavy sigh and a worn countenance, the years of sensational court appearances and damaged headlines, the courtroom murmured, as the Oscar winner adjusted the microphone and looked down at his hands and tried to steady them. It was his first time addressing publicly, under oath, about his ties to Sean Diddy Combs, and about the night his name was, having been dragged into one of the most dramatic scandals in entertainment history. Cuba Gooding Jr. mounted the stand. With a heavy sigh, his face aged by years. The courtroom mumbled as the Oscar winner adjusted the microphone, looked down at his hands, and attempted to. It was his first time addressing publicly, under oath, about his ties to Sean Diddy Combs, and the night his own name was dragged into. One of the most explosive controversies in Hollywood history. "I'm not here to protect anyone anymore," he began, voice quiet but firm. "I'm here to tell that the prosecutor guided him through his early meetings with Diddy, including informal parties, industry mixes, and yacht invites." Cuba met Sean through a mutual acquaintance in the early 2000s. He was charismatic, powerful, and knew how to make you feel like you were the greatest, important person in the room. But that charm came at a cost. When asked about the infamous yacht party, where Diddy allegedly tried to feed him a young, the eyes of a man named Lil Rod Cuba dropped, and he gulped hard. "At first, I thought it was simply another party, but there was something about the way he kept saying, 'I got something special for you.' It felt odd." He paused, and I remember Lil Rod being there, real silent, just observing everything. Diddy got him to sit next to me, told him to relax. I tried to make small chat, but he looked afraid, like he didn't belong. Cuba's voice trembled slightly. "I didn't do anything. I didn't touch him. I never touched him. I swear to God." He raised his hand and gazed squarely at the jurors, whatever he was intending. "I didn't play that game, but he wanted me to." He put it up that way. The courtroom was hushed. The prosecutor nodded, then asked, "Did you feel trapped?" Cuba blinked hard, his voice now quivering. "Yes, God, you don't say no to Sean Combs. He had people's eyes and would remind you without saying anything." I got up and departed early that night. I knew something was wrong. I'd made plenty of blunders, but never like that. Then came the tears. Cuba fumbled for a tissue, his hand trembling. I was in the headlines for things I did, yes, and I've owned up to those. I pleaded guilty, paid settlements, and went through hell. But this wasn't me. He took a deep breath and continued. "And when my name came up in this circus, I thought I'd lose my head. I've worked my whole life, and suddenly people believe I was a part of that insane number. I'm here because I want people to hear it from me, not a blog or a whisper." The prosecutor played a recording from deposition where Lil Rod recalled the encounter. Cuba glanced forward as the words rang in the courtroom. After it ended, he wiped his throat. "If I ever made someone feel uncomfortable, I'm sorry, but I didn't touch that kid. I didn't touch anyone at that party. And if Sean's team wants to use me as a scapegoat, the walls are crumbling in. They chose the wrong man." He looked down, crumpled the tissue in his fingers, and mumbled, "I should have said anything sooner, but I was terrified." The prosecutor let it settle before moving on to Cuba, where he was then probed about his overall connection with Diddy. Continued describing the parties, and the replies would only grow darker from there. Hollywood red carpet champagne networking. But then the invitations changed. Diddy started hosting these elite events. "Not even your agent. Never get you in." unless you had the appropriate face or name. Cuba shifted in his seat, and I remember once, at his estate in Miami, everyone had to give up their phones at the door. It was not odd. But then they given out robes. Garments said it was a spa-themed. But once you were inside, it was like entering into another universe. He paused again, wiping his face. People assume I'm saying this now to rescue myself, but I'm not. I've already fallen. About redemption. This is about putting an end to what's still happening. And there was a beat of stillness. Before the prosecutor leaned forward. Have you ever seen someone being hurt? Cuba looked down and heard shouts and crying. I saw women hurry out through rear doors. But I didn't see anyone physically hurt with my own eyes. But I knew we all knew the courtroom remained immobile, as if terrified that even breathing too loudly would break the gravity of what was unfolding. Gooding Jr., the man once cheered for demanding, "Show me the money," was now grieving not for himself, but for what he failed to stop, for what he could have. Leaned forward slowly and dabbed his eyes with a new tissue, helping to hide just by being silent. I used to think they didn't have fun, or that the parties were too wild, but now I know they did. Probably warned, threatened, hushed the prosecutor. Turned to him again, this time changing tone. Why talk now, Mr. Gooding? Why here? Cuba hesitated, because I have a son, and I know what happens when you don't say something. Silence doesn't protect anyone. It simply makes the monsters bolder. He told how in the years after his own troubles, people started avoiding him. Calls dried up, projects evaporated, and some friends went. The radio was silent, but Sean still called and invited me, which made me wonder why he looked up at the jurors, because he knew I had been carried through the mud, because he felt I'd defend him now, like I owed him. A new exhibit was launched. A shot from a 2013 vacation to the Bahamas. Cuba is sat next to Diddy, in the backdrop a group of nearly dressed guests with blurred out faces. I didn't know they were that young, he added. No one asked no one. We merely smiled for the camera. He clenched his eyes firmly, keeping back further tears. That picture haunts me, because I appear cheerful. I look like I'm having the time of my life. And all I can think about now is how many people were suffering around me when the judge called for during a 10-minute recess. Cuba remained in his chair, scratching his face and mumbling something that only the courtroom microphones picked up. God forgive me. As the jury filed out, the tension lingered like smoke. No one cheered, no one muttered. They just observed the broken man on the witness stand, stuck between his past. Given a chance to finally tell the truth, Cuba returned to the witness stand after recess with a different kind of tension in the air. His suit was somewhat furrowed now, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't need prompting to continue. He leaned into the mic like he'd been holding this in for years. There is one thing I've never mentioned publicly. He began, his voice low and shaking. One night at Diddy's place in LA, something happened that I couldn't unsee. He wiped his eyes before the tears ever flowed. It was one of those parties where nothing felt real, where everyone had to sign NDAs before coming in, where wandered around with masks, not for fun, but to protect names. I recall coming into the upstairs corridor and hearing a female scream. The courtroom froze. I didn't know what to do. I froze. I assumed maybe it was part of the party, but when I turned the corner, I noticed a security officer slamming a door shut as if he didn't. When I asked him what was going on, his voice cracked, and he simply glanced at me and stated, "This room is off limits, Mr. Gooding." He stared forward as if he were again in that corridor. I walked away without saying anything. We've seen too much, and people like us need to stick together. He gave out a harsh laugh. It sounded like support, but when my name came up in this case, I knew I'd be dragged through the mud all over again. I knew they'd say I was just deflecting from my past. But I'm not deflecting. I'm owning it. He put up his palm, tears rolling down his face. I messed up. I wounded people. I touched someone without their consent. I pleaded guilty, served time, made settlements, did the work, and I still carry that humiliation. But what I'm talking about now goes beyond me. This is a system, a sickness, a machine that feeds on quiet and thrives on fear and the atmosphere. Suddenly, as the prosecutor exhibited a series of images, events gallus red carpets, where Cuba stood beside, Diddy smiling, joking. "Do you remember this night?" the prosecution questioned. Pointing to a photo from 2014, Cuba nodded. "Yes, it was the BET after party in Atlanta, the one with Basement Club." What occurred that night, Cuba hesitated. There was a girl seemed barely legal, maybe not even that she was dancing on a table. Diddy clapped his hands and pointed to her. A few minutes later, security had her in a side room. I never saw her leave the gallery. One juror covered her lips. "Did you report it?" "No," Cuba whispered. "I didn't. I persuaded myself she'd be all right since it wasn't my place. And I didn't see anything clear enough to say, but deep inside, I knew." He looked around the courtroom. You view this industry from the outside and think everyone's living the dream. But once you're inside, you realize the actual currency isn't money, but secrets. He took a long pause, breathing through his nose. Dodie had secrets on everyone, and everybody knew if he had something on. You kept quiet, even if he didn't, just in case the prosecutor approached with one last question for this portion. "What do you want the world to take away from your testimony today?" Cuba stared squarely at the camera, transmitting this moment around the globe, and spoke carefully. "The truth is that your past errors do not prevent you from safeguarding others, and that if you remain silent long enough, you become part of the problem. I won't be a part of it anymore." He wiped away another tear. "I was scared I was selfish, but I'm not that man anymore. And if the truth today prevents even one person from suffering through what I saw, it may not be too late." The judge called for another recess, but this time Cuba stood. On firmer legs, Cuba Gooding Jr. returned to the stand after the recess. His shoulders heavier, but his voice more forceful. He didn't wait for a question. "This time I have to talk about this next portion," he said, holding the edges of the witness stand. "Because I saw things that night that I can't unsee and can't retain." Acting like I didn't, the prosecutor nodded for him to proceed. Cuba took a breath and dived back into the timeline of his contacts with Diddy. One weekend retreat in the Hollywood Hills was supposed to be a celebration for someone's birthday. Diddy flew a group of us in no press, no phones, all the usual regulations. But something shifted that weekend. There was this strange feeling, note excitement, anticipation, as everyone was waiting for the main event. He wiped his mouth, then his brow, and I continued wondering what we were truly there for, and everyone kept passing it off. Then about midnight, the home staff started handing out masks, really masks in black and gold. When they told us it was a themed party, I thought, okay, perhaps it's just theatrics. But as I entered the rear wing there were people lined up like cattle, men and women, some barely dressed. And Sean Diddy was in the home. His voice cracked again. I turned to go because I didn't want to be a part of it, but I made the mistake of looking too long. It was calm and frightening, like a king supervising a ceremony. Cuba claimed that one of Did's security guards grabbed him along the corridor and told him, "You didn't see anything, Gooding. That's the rule you want to keep in place, correct?" I nodded. That's all I could do. I wasn't brave back then. The court remained silent, astonished. Cuba looked down. I've been silent for too long, and I know some people will said, I'm only doing this now to improve my image or sell a movie. But I don't mind if my testimony helps stop even one. Somebody from being damaged like that. Then it's worth every story, every criticism, every outrage. Then he dropped a tidbit that froze the courtroom, and I saw people there that night that are now publicly distancing themselves from Sean celebs, executives, people with families and empires. They all looked the same, other way, and now they're saying they knew nothing. It's the lie that hurts the most. He continued, more composed but still visibly shaken. The reason I'm speaking now is because I witnessed the house transform into a graveyard of innocence, and I did nothing. I'm not going to make excuses anymore. I was complicit by staying quiet. He hesitated, swallowing his guilt. At another party in Las Vegas, I observed a young woman being pulled down. Hallway, I didn't know her. I didn't even know her name, but I saw her eyes. I saw her trying to signal me, and I did nothing. I simply walked away. Cuba leaned into the mic. It keeps me up every night, because the truth is that there were dozens of them girls over the years, and we didn't ask any questions. We were too fearful, too selfish, too deep in the world. Diddy created the prosecutor, asked if he ever told anybody. Cuba nodded. I tried once and called her back in 2016. I told a lawyer friend of mine about the masks, parties, and silences, and he encouraged me to drop it because the NDAs would bury me and I would be painted as unstable because of my own charges. So I stayed quiet again. His voice grew firmer, but Cassie and Lil Rod came forward, and I realized I wasn't the only one suffering from guilt, which gave me the guts to approach the prosecution and say, put me on the stand, I'll talk. Because if someone had done that for that girl in Vegas, maybe her story wouldn't be a cautionary tale now. Wiped his eyes again. I'm not searching for redemption. That's between myself and God. I'm looking for justice for the people who were injured, for the names we'll never know, for the ones who never made it out of those houses. Then he looked toward the defensive table, where Diddy sat stone-faced. I hope you hear this, Sean. I hope you remember every name, cry, and celebration you turned into a prison, because we remember now, and the truth speaks louder than your money. Cuba's closing comments rang around the room, and the prosecution asked him, one last question, what do you want the world to take from your testimony? Cuba glanced straight forward. Quiet is a chain, and I broke mine. I want people to know that you don't have to be perfect to speak out, you just have to be honest. He continued, Hollywood has this sickness, this addiction to power, and Sean was the distributor. He made people feel like gods, and in return, they showed him loyalty. I know because I was one of them, and it cost me my profession, reputation, and possibly even my soul. He shifted his seat. I spent years attempting to mend what I'd broken in myself, and I'll never fully recover what I lost. But I can be a witness, or a voice. Then abruptly, his serenity cracked again. He started crying again. But not because of remorse, but from relief. I can't keep carrying it. I can't keep pretending I didn't see. From what I witnessed, he stood unasked and addressed the room as a confession. So he apologized to the women of the world, people who believed I was superior to the I'm sorry for the ones I didn't save. He sat down, emptied the courtroom, sat shocked. Silent, the prosecutor simply said, Thank you, Mr. Gooding, and rested. No more spin, no more guesswork. Just the truth. Honest, human, and long, overdue.